Well, hello everyone. I think we'll get started for our session today. Hi everyone, my name is Heather Turnbull and I'm the president of ACPI International. For those of you who are guests and not members yet of this global organization, we're a not-for-profit global group representing about 30 countries around the world for career practitioners and those who have a vested interest in talent and talent development. Just a little bit about this Salon series. The idea actually came from a member survey that we did last fall, and three particular things came up for our members. One, they wanted a lot more interaction, and in particular to make visual connection with each other. Our tradition had been to host at least one international conference a year. And so as we ramp up to doing a particular international function, we wanted to do some local as well as national forums. And this provides a great opportunity to do that, to make that connectivity. We want to thank particularly today our Salon host, one in the New England network actually. So welcome Deborah Burkholder and her group, Tom McDonough. They're waving there, which is great. This is so cool. And there's Ron Elston. Ron is in California today. I'm in Toronto, Canada. Zeem, which is the association service provider for ACP International, is also in Toronto. And welcome to our other members, primarily I think in North America today and some in Europe. So if you can see us and hear us, that's awesome. Just as a little bit of housekeeping before we get started and I formally introduce Ron Elston. Once the webinar begins, and we have had a little bit of feedback as we've tested this morning, we're going to be putting all the attendees on mute until the end of the presentation. And then Ron is going to cover all of his remarks, and then he'll lead us in a general discussion. And hopefully at that time we can unmute everybody, and if you have some particular questions for Ron, then that will be the time to ask them. Also, you have a chance on the dashboard within GoToWebinar to actually type in your questions. And so you can do that at any time, and we'll be monitoring that, and then you'll have a chance to have that question responded to by Ron. Also, I just want to let you know that the presentation today is being recorded, and one of the member benefits of ACP International is to access the recordings through MP3 and through download. So if you're in a totally different time zone today, our members in Australia and New Zealand are for sure, then they'll be able to download this and to enjoy it at any time as a member benefit. At this point, I'm really delighted to welcome Ron Elston. He's, in addition to being a member of ACP International, what I would call a Renaissance guy, and captures, I think, a very great elegance between hard skills and soft skills, and in effect, what career practitioners and talent professionals are today. He's based in California. His organizational practice is called Elston Organizational Renewal, and he works with corporate as well as nonprofit entities. And he has another aspect of his business, which is around individual career consulting and coaching, called New Beginnings Career and College Guidance. So he covers a huge spectrum of service to the industry. He's a prolific author. In addition to the book that he's going to be talking about today on social responsibility, he's authored Affiliation in the Workplace, which is Value Creation in the New Organization, and as well another one that I particularly like, Building Workforce Strength, Creating Value Through Workforce and Career Development. He has an eclectic background, including electronics and chemical engineering. He holds a PhD in chemical engineering from Cambridge University, a master's degree in career development from John F. Kennedy University in the US, and he has a first-class honors degree in chemical engineering from Leeds University. So with great delight and very professional thanks for his contribution today, please welcome Ron Elston and his interactive and very exciting topic, Business Behaving Well and Social Responsibility. Welcome, Ron.
Great. Thanks so much, Heather. It's a pleasure to be with the group today. And as you can tell from my accent, I'm from California. So it's really good to be with ACP I think this is the second presentation I've done. The last one wasn't quite this technically complicated. So pardon me if I press the wrong button here, but I'll do my best to stay with our technology. It's a real pleasure to be here. And my compliments to everyone for sitting in on this session, because it's such an important topic. And it affects not just our generation, it affects generations to come. Now, I'm going to bring the screen up so it's full screen. I'm actually going to close my webcam so I don't distract you with that view. I'm going to go full screen here with the presentation. Let's keep our fingers crossed that. There we go. Okay. All right. So hopefully, let me just check in here and make sure. Can you see the full screen slide at this point? Good. Okay. All right. Excellent. Okay. I'm going to start with just a little vignette here. About 3-4 years ago, I was part of a survey that the USDA conducts. And it's a survey on the subject of food insecurity, which is a euphemism for hunger. And it's done every 3 or 4 years. In fact, the next version is coming up this year. And this survey is conducted at food distribution sites. And it uses volunteers, as I say, to collect this information. Well, this particular survey, I remember very distinctly one particular situation. And this was being conducted in a church hall. And basically, here we were, the people conducting the survey, at the end of the room, behind tables, a fairly austere church hall, hardwood floors and so on. One end of the church hall are tables with bags on them, with food in them. I remember one day, when we were doing this survey, the people coming in for food would be offered the chance to complete the survey, and those that were kind enough to do so would come up to our tables. And one gentleman coming up to my table to conduct the survey, sitting down, he was probably in his 70s, I think from Eastern Europe. He had a fairly pronounced accent. And there's a point in the survey where we asked the question, have you ever been in a situation where you didn't have enough money to buy food, you weren't hungry? And he said with kind of a tear in his eye, yes, unfortunately, I have been in that situation. And I really felt so much for him. There was a quiet grace about him. And it caused me to ask the question, how is it that we, in this enormously prosperous society, that we can leave people exposed like this, dependent on sporadic charitable support? And in a sense, part of what we'll be talking about here is what's the role of business in this? In our societies where business is a very major part of the economy, what role does business have to play? And that's kind of what we'll look at. And I think it's fair to say also that the recent economic turmoil that has gone on calls into question a purely market-oriented doctrine with a narrow business focus only on financial return, a narrow manager focus on personal enrichment, and a narrow public policy focus on limiting strong government. Individuals, organizations, and communities suffer with this approach. And there are alternatives, which is what we'll explore. They involve socially responsible business practices supported by enlightened public policy and thoughtful individual responsibility. So, okay, we're going to actually, the first step, I'm just going to have to go away from full screen here, if I can. Okay. So we're going to conduct a polling slide here, and I wonder if Lane would be kind enough to bring up a poll. And the poll question is a simple one. Are companies responsible for more than shareholder returns? And the answer is yes or no. From your point of view, do you think they are or they're not? So I think Lane has opened the poll. I'm not absolutely sure. Hopefully everyone can see the poll here. And I'm wondering, Lane, if you give everyone a chance to complete it, and then if you can see the results of it.
Yeah,
or if not,
we'll give everybody about 2 more minutes, and then we'll close the poll for you.
Okay, great. All right, we're probably going to need quite 2 minutes, Lane. So we'll take a look at it. Okay. All right. So Lane is sharing our poll results here. Okay. If you can see them, Lane, perhaps you could let us know, because I can't actually see them.
Yep, sorry about that. So 67% of people said yes, and 33% of people said no.
Oh, that's very interesting. Okay. 67% said yes and 33% said no. Okay. So I have kind of an interesting mix. The predominant view is that indeed companies are responsible for more than just shareholder returns, but there are a significant number of people who have another perspective here. Okay. All right, so let's kind of step on here with our presentation. I'm going to put us back into full screen mode. Okay. I'm going to suggest that this question actually gets to the fundamental purpose of business. And I'm going to actually propose that one of the areas that we really need to keep in mind is that business is in service to our society and not the other way around. And sometimes I think we get that kind of reversed. Now, one of the questions this brings up, for those of us who feel that the responsibility does extend beyond shareholders, as I do, one of the issues that will come up there is to which additional stakeholders are they responsible, why and how, and we'll kind of look at that. Now, as we go through our presentation, I'd request that you perhaps keep in mind the following two questions, and we'll come back and visit those at the end. The first one is, what organizational actions can we take to address social responsibility? What organizational actions can we take? And then secondly, what individual actions can we take to address social responsibility? So after we've completed this, we'll come back and revisit those. And I'll talk for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll sort of have some discussion primarily around those questions, but other issues that come up for you as well. Now, in covering this, we're going to build on our recent book, Business Behaving Well, Social Responsibility from Learning to Doing. And this provides a rationale and a roadmap for organizations to incorporate socially responsible practices. It builds on real-world examples from contributing authors and principles of social justice. Now, we offer the book for folks, and also in a way this conversation, mindful of the Native American tale that Joan Chichester recounts. And she writes of an elder speaking about tragedy, saying, "I feel as if I have two wolves fighting in my heart. One wolf is the vengeful, angry, violent one. The other wolf is the loving, compassionate one. And on being asked, but which wolf will win the fight in your heart, she replies, it depends on which one I feed." And we hope that we feed the loving, compassionate one in this conversation and also in our book. Okay, so in broad outline terms, to set a context for this is how we'll frame our conversation. We'll start by talking about social justice, and then we'll move from that to social responsibility, and then from that to business practice. So that's generally the sort of framework that we'll follow here. And I'd like to introduce it with this quote from Martin Luther King. "All I'm saying is simply this, that all life is interrelated, that somehow we're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. You can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be." And I think it's fair to say that those thoughts will infuse everything that we're going to be talking about here today. So, social justice, well, what is it? Here's David Miller's definition: how the good and bad things in life should be distributed among the members of a human society. Now, Miller goes on to say that the pursuit of social justice in the 21st century will be a lot tougher than it was in the last half of the last century. Basically pointing out it'll be harder because the universe of social justice will be in a world in which economic, social, and political boundaries no longer neatly coincide. An example of that, in a sense, that increased complexity is Apple's situation with Foxconn, its supplier in China, and the challenges that represented. Well, one element or one aspect of social justice is that of inequality. we're looking here at income inequality and economic strength. Now, you may be familiar with a measure called the Gini coefficient. It's become well accepted as one of a number of measures of inequality. It varies from a value of 0, where you have complete equality in a society, to a value of 1, where one family owns all of the income or wealth of a society. It typically ranges between about 0.2 and 0.7. Now, these charts have the same structure. The top left refers to 23 countries, the bottom right to 123 countries. And what we see on this chart, the line with the diamonds on it in the top left, and that black line in the bottom right, that is the Gini coefficient. It refers to the axis on the right-hand side. So on that top left chart then, Sweden of these countries is the most equal, South Africa the most unequal. And we can see the US towards the right-hand side, and Canada much further to the left, much more equal. Now the bars on the chart refer to GNI per capita, gross national income per capita. It's a measure of prosperity. So if we change our focus now to the bottom right chart, what we see here is that most of the countries that are quite prosperous, the bars are high, are towards the left-hand side of the chart, which means they are more equal. The US is actually unusual in this regard. You can see it is what we have in the US is a relatively high level of inequality. In fact, we're more like a third world developing country, but still a high level of prosperity. It raises all sorts of questions about the long-term implications of that. And also, unfortunately, what's been happening is our level of inequality in the US has been growing significantly since the 1980s. It's driven, and we see it in other aspects as well, where we actually have about 46 million people now in poverty. That's more than the entire population of Canada. 1 in 5 children under 18 in poverty. So there are significant social issues here. And one of the questions that surfaces is, well, is this just sort of one of those things that happens? Well, it doesn't. It happens because of specific policies. Taxation policy in the US has favored the wealthy since the 1980s. And choices within organizations, which brings us back to social responsibility, specifically around compensation, have favored those at very senior levels. So a CEO today typically earns more in one day than an average worker earns in a year. And that raises some real questions. So this level of inequality that we see happens because of intentional policy decisions, either public policy or within organizations. Well, you might say, so what? Why should we care about it? Well, I'm going to suggest there are actually 3 reasons why it's very important: social, practical, and emotional reasons. Lowering inequality helps on a number of dimensions. Actually helps us live longer, reduces murder rates, increases trust, and so on. And one way this is reflected is an index that we see in this next chart. And this is an index of a number of health and social problems. And you see that index on the left-hand side includes different aspects such as life expectancy, infant mortality, trust, and so on. And then in this particular chart, what's plotted is this index of various health and social problems against inequality. And what we see is that as inequality increases, so do these various social problems. And of course, the US way off to the right. Canada's somewhere in the middle. Now, you could say, again, so what? If everyone has an equal chance and equal mobility within an economy, well, so what? Everyone can pull themselves up by their bootstraps should they so wish. Well, that's another myth, unfortunately. As inequality, not surprisingly, as inequality increases, it becomes much more difficult, in fact, to have economic mobility. So not only this inequality actually entrenches itself, and it makes it more difficult to have economic mobility. On a second level, this is a practical level, inequality presents challenges. We actually did some mathematical modeling of what does inequality do in terms of discretionary spending. What we found in the US is that more than $4 trillion of discretionary spending has been lost since 1970 just due to growing inequality. most of that actually since the early 90s. So it kind of sucks the fuel out of the economy, not surprisingly. So on a very practical level, it's a problem. And then on an emotional level, it also presents issues. And this is actually a chart. The chart we're seeing here is a chart of happiness against income. And this particular chart, it shows a similar trend when it's across countries, within a country, and so on. And what you see is that as income increases, happiness levels off, not surprisingly. You know, if Bill Gates has another $1 billion, it doesn't make the slightest difference to his level of happiness. The way that the folks who study this describe it is that there are declining marginal effects of income on subjective well-being. Well, when the curve is shaped like this, what that means, it has fundamental implications for what kind of income distribution creates the greatest sense of happiness within a society. And so, for example, we start around a multiple of 1, everyone roughly that level, and then we move to significantly high levels of inequality. That means some people move over to the right of the curve and some to the left. The net effect is a reduction in overall happiness because that curve is sloped more steeply at the left than it is to the right. If it was shaped differently, like if it went up exponentially, well, then we may behave differently. It might be like bees in a beehive, and we would give everything to the queen bee in the hive. But that's not how we're made. It's one reason why the world's major faith traditions speak to the importance of supporting all in our society. It's one reason why societies that are more equal are better places to live. And so the question it poses is, where would we like our society to move in the future? To further inequality and the economic and social deprivation that comes with that, or greater equality and the benefits that brings. You know, there's a kind of an analogy I sometimes think of in connection with this. It's an experiment, a physics experiment I remember from high school. And the experiment is if you have a glass rod with a valve in the middle, and on each end of the rod a soap bubble. And one bubble is large and the other bubble is small. And the question is, if you open the valve, what happens to the two bubbles? Does the large bubble grow at the expense of the small one, or do they equalize? Well, actually what happens is the large one does indeed grow at the expense of the small one. And that's why a special interests are allowed to dictate what happens in an economy. Essentially that large bubble grows at the expense of the other one. So, okay. For our Canadian friends, here's a quote from Tommy Douglas, who founded the Canadian public health care system, and I think perhaps it's fair to say, for many people, is a national hero for that. Here's Tommy Douglas. Courage, my friends, it is not too late to build a better world. And there are in the US also, which are supportive of exactly that theme, and one of those is Franklin Roosevelt. And Franklin Roosevelt in 1944 created a second Bill of Rights, building on the fundamental political rights to life and liberty, freedom, and so on. The second Bill of Rights recognizes that these alone are inadequate to ensure equality in the pursuit of happiness. And that second Bill of Rights extends rights to include economic truths. And they include, for example, the right to a useful and remunerative job, the right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing, the right of every business person, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom from unfair competition, the right of every family to a decent home, the right to adequate medical care, the right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment, the right to a good education. Now, in some areas, we've made much progress. For example, the right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age. But in many areas, unfortunately, we still have much to do. So much opportunity here on a social level. Which brings us to corporate social responsibility. Well, here's one definition of it. What it can be defined as the economic, legal, ethical, and discretionary expectations that society has of organizations at a given point in time. Corporate social responsibility is related to business ethics. In fact, I think it's fair to say where business ethics focuses on the moral judgment and behavior of individuals and groups within organizations, that business ethics is a component of the larger area of corporate social responsibility. Here's an example of support from the corporate world, from David Packard, one of the founders of Hewlett-Packard. I think people assume wrongly that a company exists solely to make money. Money is an important part of a company's existence if the company is any good, but a result is not a cause. We have to go deeper and find the real reason for our being. A group of people get together and exist as an institution that we call a company, so they're able to accomplish something collectively that they could not accomplish separately. They make a contribution to society. Here's another quote. In our book, one of our chapter authors spoke to a number of people locally in the Bay Area, both in non-profits and for-profit organizations. And here's a quote from somebody in a for-profit. The value of a social responsibility policy is really about how a partnership between business and non-profit organizations can improve the community they both serve. It's an investment to improve our quality of life. Now, there are other views on the right and the left. Milton Friedman on the right would represent the view that would say the business of business is only to make money. I think it's fair to say that much of Friedman's work has been discredited by the economic collapse that occurred recently, but nevertheless, that's certainly a strongly held view by some segments. And on the left, Robert Reich, concerned that organizations engaging in corporate responsibility might in some way detract from the public sector's responsibility in that area. But the strong support in many sectors in the corporate world, because there are significant benefits to corporate social responsibility. For example, companies that contribute to their communities are more likely to have loyal customers who continue doing business with them. Significant benefits in this area. One of the studies that was done showed that customers of organizations high in corporate responsibility were 3 times more likely to be loyal than those of low CPI organizations, where CPI stands for Corporate Philanthropy Index. Employees more likely to recommend the company as a good place to work and continue to work for the company when it's actively involved in this area of corporate social responsibility. And shareholders are more likely to invest and may suggest the firm to other investors. So what we're seeing here is this is not something only for altruistic reasons. It has strong business implications as well. And there are various measurement approaches that are mentioned at the bottom of this slide. Well, what are the implications for business practice? You know, I'm going to tell a little story about this. There was an article that Jonas Serra wrote in the New York Times in 2008. American Airlines and Southwest Airlines account for many of the customer passenger airline miles in the U.S. today. And they held their annual meetings on the same day in 2008 in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But that's where the similarity ends. An hour before the American meeting began, members of the Association of Professional Flight Attendants and the Allied Pilots Association began picketing, handing out anti-management packets. In the meeting, Gerald Arpey, the chief executive of AMR, which is American's parent company, bemoaned the state of the industry and described a combination of upcoming route cuts and the passenger surcharges that are now all too familiar. Jonas Serra goes on to describe the Southwest annual meeting. Herb Kelleher, the company's co-founder, was stepping down as chairman after 37 years. These are Serra's words. When Mr. Kelleher, 77, entered the main meeting room, shareholders gave him a kind of standing ovation usually reserved for rock stars. Not only did the Southwest pilots not set up a picket line, they took out a full-page ad in USA Today thanking Mr. Kelleher for all that he had done. What does this have to do with stakeholders? Southwest Airlines has been consistently profitable for a long while, much more so than American. It's not surprising that Southwest's mission statement prominently includes the following. Above all, employees will be provided the same concern, respect, and caring attitude within the organization that they're expected to share externally with every Southwest customer. And it's not surprising to see valuing many stakeholders at the core of Southwest's success. What is surprising is how many other organizations miss this crucial foundation for success. So let's talk a bit more about corporate social responsibility and how the interconnections that exist here. I'm actually going to suggest that one important aspect are the interconnections between for-profit organizations, the public sector, and non-profit. In the US, there are more than 1.5 million non-profits with a combined revenue of $1.7 trillion out of a GDP of about $14 trillion. So they're very significant. Public sector is about 42% of GDP. As we move more to community-based economies with greater economic equality and economic mobility, that public sector increases. But still the same relationship is an important one, considering those different groups. And also important is to be aware of and think about the stakeholders involved in organizations. This is how Werther and Chandler break out stakeholders connected with organizations into 3 groups: organizational stakeholders, employees, managers, shareholders, unions, and so on; economic stakeholders, customers, competitors, and so on; and then societal stakeholders, government, communities, and such like. And so I think recognizing here that there are many stakeholders affected by organizations, all of whom with a significant stake in the organization. Now, we've talked about social responsibility kind of as an end state, but another important consideration is what stages do organizations go through in adopting socially responsible practices. This is a perspective from Simon Zadek and his co-workers, identifying 5 stages. The first is defensive. That's kind of denying the need for these practices. An example might be bribery overseas, the Walmart situation, where initially I think there was some denial of that, or at least alleged bribery, but it now seems like Walmart really is embracing the issue and addressing the issue. The second stage is compliance, that kind of gritting your teeth and saying, oh, I'll put up with this, really don't want to. And you see that sometimes in the environmental area, certainly in the financial community in its reluctance to adopt some of the regulations that would seem to be very necessary. The third stage is managerial. That's embedding societal issues into core management processes, daily operations. An example there might be diversity. The fourth stage is strategic, integrating societal issues into core business strategies. For example, culturally competent healthcare. The fifth stage is civil, promoting broad industry participation in corporate responsibility. For example, climate change. And as businesses mature in the area of social responsibility, they move from denial to ultimately a stage of broad industry participation. One of the questions to be thinking about is, for the organizations that you interface with, where are they on the scale? Now, Zadek also points out that social issues themselves evolve through these various stages, from latent through emerging, through consolidating, through institutionalized, and observes that the greatest danger is to take a deny defensive posture with an institutionalized issue. For example, working conditions in outsourced facilities. The greatest opportunities for the civil posture in a latent issue, something like zero waste. Now, in speaking to this, I think it's also important to acknowledge that socially responsible business leadership has a key role to play, and several aspects to that. Strategic insight, operational effectiveness, interpersonal sensitivity, and openness to the inclusion and welfare of others. I'm just going to read a quote here from Dominique Browning, which is maybe a bit peripheral, but related to it. I find room in my life again for love of the world, that the quiet of solitary moments steal over me, give myself over to joy. These are our moments of grace. I connect with something I may have once encountered as a teenager and then lost in the frantic skim through adulthood, the desire to nourish my soul. I do not have the temerity to think that I have found God. I think instead that I have stumbled into a conversation that I pray will last the rest of my life. So, some examples of social responsibility in policy and practice. And these are the examples that we speak to in our book. I'm just going to mention each of these. So, first of all, in the area of partnership, Barbara Langsdale, who works for a nonprofit in the Bay Area, spent some time interviewing folks in non-profit and for-profit organizations to get a sense about what attributes work well. How is it possible to create an effective partnership? And identifies specific steps that can be effective here. For example, for the for-profit, due diligence processes about for the non-profit, pardon me, about the partner, understanding corporate social responsibility policy, and for the for-profit, questions such as how will a corporate social responsibility policy be promoted? What kind of partnership is most effective or would be most effective for the not-for-profit? In the area of for-profit and government interaction, Andy Domek, who works actually in Sacramento in the public sector, looks at the relationship of government to for-profits and how government can encourage social responsibility, and points out that engaging in business necessarily places people within their communities. Businesses are not solitary endeavors, rather they are community-based activities. The act of engaging in business is a community action, and so too is government a community action. Now, in terms of sectors, in the healthcare sector, Debbie Levine, who wrote this chapter in our book, has many years of experience in public policy, specifically healthcare policy. We could spend an awful long time on healthcare. It's obviously a critical issue in the U.S., which struggles so desperately, where we struggle so desperately in terms of addressing healthcare. And this chapter explores that, looks at the history of the evolution of healthcare in the U.S., the implications of the Affordable Care Act, and then further steps that will be needed in the future. In the financial sector, Jim Leatherberry, who actually runs a hedge fund, looks at this sector, the challenges that have arisen here, and some of the steps that could be, some of the successes and some of the further steps for the future. And then in terms of organizations, Chemonics is an organization that works with USAID overseas. And the chapter here, which Megan Kohler, Emmett Moore, and Pearl Sims write, looks at a relationship between Chemonics and the Republic of Georgia, specifically around their education system and helping to strengthen their education system. At the same time, looking at fundamental principles of social responsibility and how those principles can be examined and perhaps applied elsewhere. Taproot is an organization that provides pro bono services. Actually, it's now quite large, has many thousand volunteers from the for-profit sector who then go in teams into not-for-profit organizations to provide specific services built around their areas of expertise. It was formed on the West Coast originally, now in Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, I think maybe DC or one other area, I believe. The founder of Taproot, Aaron Hurst, has been around since 2001. The founder of Taproot, Aaron Hurst, speaks about pro bono services and what that looks like and how that works as another example of corporate social responsibility. The FedEx Tennessee Department of Human Services example is a fascinating one because it's a situation where FedEx had a need for employees and the Tennessee Department of Human Services was trying to place people. And so they came together in partnership successfully to actually address the needs of both. Kaiser Permanente is a very large healthcare provider in the U.S. Those on the West Coast will be familiar with Kaiser. It has over 9 million members. And we have two different chapters in our book related to Kaiser. Eileen Beach, Laura Long, and Bob Redlow speak about culturally competent care as an example of a socially responsible business practice. And then Zephyr Jemian examines Kaiser's approach to partnership between management and unions through a labor management partnership and the effectiveness of that particular approach, because Kaiser really has taken a leading position in that area, and then the implications for that kind of approach elsewhere. Which brings us now to our two questions. So I'm now going to back out of full screen mode, and I'm actually going to bring us back in here, share the webcam here, and open up these questions. And I'm wondering if Lane is going to be able to unmute us here so we can have some discussion around these two questions. And then after these questions, I have 2 or 3 slides just to wrap up at the end. But Lane, are you able to unmute us at this point?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm just going to unmute everybody now, and we should be able to get started with the discussion.
Perfect.
It's just going to take me
We
one
made
moment.
it, I think.
Just one moment.
Oh, no, we didn't.
It's also possible we might get some feedback here.
Okay, we may get a little bit of feedback, and God,
Yeah, we're getting quite a bit of feedback.
all kinds of interesting.
Okay, I've unmuted everyone. However, the feedback is
Yeah, I'm not sure how else it's going to work.
Well, let's try then opening up the floor by people raising their hand. That might work for us.
Can you put us back on mute again and bring me back in?
Yep, just one moment. Okay, Ron, you're back.
Okay, thanks so much, Wade. Okay, so let's see if we can try to do this a slightly different way. Lane, is there some mechanism whereby if somebody would like to make an observation or comment that they're able to do so? Uh-oh.
Yes, there is. No,
muted as well,
we can use the raise your hand feature, which is located on the dashboard at the very top, I believe. So anybody who has a question, we will be able to unmute your line. You can ask the question and we can go from there. I would like to unmute the other salon so that you guys are all able to participate as well. And I apologize for my voice. So just one moment, please.
Thanks for doing this, Lane. So good of you to do it. You're not feeling good.
No problem. So I've unmuted Deborah's salon, so they are able to speak and answer questions as well.
Okay.
And
Excellent. Well, that's great. Let's ask the question of Deborah's salon then. The first of those two questions: what organizational actions can we take to address social responsibility?
This is Josh Sheldon. I'm part of the group in Greater Transitions of Boston, Transitions of Greater Boston. I think that one of the big things with organizational, if an organization can find a cause that fits very well with the brand and what the brand is about, the company is about, I think that they get a double effect where, number one, they're helping to improve society, but also, as you were saying, there's the engagement with the consumers as well as with the workers. So I think you get a double-edged sword where you're helping not only your brand and the profit of your company, but also the engagement of the consumer in the society.
Yeah, so your point, which is a good one, is that from a business perspective, if the organization can connect their social responsibility initiatives to their brand, that has significant business benefits for them.
As well as I think it gives more meaning to that, and more, probably a lot more oomph behind the initiative to move forward with that initiative.
Are there examples you've seen of that that you might like to comment on?
I think one of the ones that are really neat, Panera Bread is a really good example where they have their, I forget what I believe it's something like Dough Nation, but dough is spelled like bread. And they have some stores. They're opening one in Boston shortly. I know they have one in St. Louis where you come in and you choose how much you want to pay for the sandwich that you're going to purchase, and all proceeds go to Feeding the Hungry. I believe it all goes to Feeding America.
That's fascinating. That's a great example. Okay. Other thoughts that might be coming up for you about organizational actions that we can take to address social responsibility?
Ron, we actually have a question from Mark Venning. I'm just going to unmute his line, and he'll be able to ask the question. So just one moment, please.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, it actually looks like Mark's not connected to the audio. So Cheryl has a question, so I'm going to unmute Cheryl now. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Okay, sure.
Hi, Ron. This is Cheryl. I think this is a very interesting topic, but I also think that we might want to think of small things that individual leaders can do in organizations when there is a spur-of-the-moment need, as opposed to making it a big corporate responsibility initiative. For example, after Sandy in New York, which was the hurricane that you all heard about, one of the publishers in a major magazine brought her team together and took them out to Rockville Center, which had been pretty much decimated, and they volunteered several days in a row to help clean up. This was a non-planned but very closely brand-connected initiative on her part that made a big difference and increased the purchase, actually, of the magazines that she was a publisher of, but that was not intended.
That's a good example. So I think your point is that there are smaller actions that can be taken, some of which can be very spontaneous, that also can be really powerful in terms of the contribution, the community contribution, and they may bring with them some business value, and they certainly cement the relationships.
Yes, and I think it was a corporate culture that enabled it, that supported it, but it was the individual's initiative that made it happen.
Yes, yes, excellent. Okay, thank you, Cheryl, for that comment. Okay. Lane, did you say someone else had a question?
Yes, so Mark has a question. He is not connected to the audio, so I'm going to read his question out loud. So his question is, do small businesses not have more of agility and opportunity to make a difference on a local basis with real visible results?
It's a very interesting question. I've actually been giving some talks to groups of CEOs and COOs of small businesses in the Bay Area here. And yes, what's fascinating is that indeed there are all sorts of opportunities on a local level to have significant impact. So what we're talking about here is not in any sense limited to large organizations. It can apply to organizations at all different levels. You know, it's interesting. I once heard the daughter of David Packard speak, and she spoke about, and she actually is very active in the philanthropic world. And somebody asked the question, why have you been so active in this world? You don't have to. You have lots of money. There's no need for you to do this. And she made a really interesting observation. She said, you know, when my parents founded Hewlett-Packard in that garage in Palo Alto many years ago, from day one, that organization was active in philanthropy when it was very small. And so it's exactly to your point that what we're speaking about here in no way is limited to only organizations of a certain size. The nature of corporate social responsibility will look different according to the nature of each organization and the size of it, but the opportunity exists regardless of size. Hello, Heather. We can't hear you, unfortunately, but I can see you.
There we go.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Ron. Thank you very much for a very comprehensive presentation today. I have a question, and it really drills down to what can we as career professionals, as citizen stakeholders, really do to impact the levels. We seem to be at that resistance level from a lot of organizations at this time. How do we, as I say, as career professionals, as citizen shareholders, make an impression with organizations to get more involved in this?
Yeah, so let's actually pick up on a couple of things. In terms of organizational actions, we heard a couple, and I'm going to pick up on your question, Heather, which which gets to that second issue, individual actions. I mean, many of the organizational actions that can be taken concern addressing or interacting with socially responsible suppliers, customers, partners, and so on, collaborative workforce practices, addressing social and community causes, such like. Now, individual actions that we can take, whether as career professionals or in general as citizens, a couple of things I'd suggest. First, staying informed about emerging social, business, and workplace issues to kind of guide our own personal commitments, first thing. The second is staying informed about organizations and their social responsibility practices to guide engagement or not, whether as an employee, a contractor, a supplier, investor, or a customer. So actually affecting our own decisions about how we interact. And the third one is influencing public policy by supporting candidates who speak to the needs of all in our society. And in that, if necessary, engaging in legislative campaigns and direct action. So it's a combination of staying informed, our engagement with organizations, choosing to engage specifically with organizations which are effective in this area, and then also engaging with public policy. Does that make sense, Heather?
Absolutely. I was really taken by the three aspects, the social, the practical, and the emotional. And as it drills down into the workplace health, particularly here in Canada, the tremendous financial struggles that organizations are having right now just on the workplace health issues, mental health, and so on and so forth. And from the other aspect, too, as we are trying to attract and retain people in the workplace, the social and the corporate social responsibility impacts and certainly the organizations who are contributing towards that and making a statement in it are part of the attraction issues, I think, that organizations are facing. So there again is another touchstone along the talent continuum for organizations to get more involved in this. So there's a bottom line impact, not just a do good kind of thing. I wanted to draw people's attention to a really interesting book. It's called Plutocrats, The Rise of the New Global Super Rich and the Fall of Everyone Else. And it's a fascinating book, and the bottom line with this book is really what are the top 0.1% wealthy individuals in the world doing about this issue. It's not just the Gates of this world and some others, but most recently at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, where I think most people think the very wealthy organizations congregate to talk about business and finance. The top 0.1% of wealthy individuals in the world come to this meeting, specifically talk about corporate social responsibility and what they can really do about it. So that's very hopeful, I think. It's not all about making money for making money's sense and sake. There really is some notion now of organizations listening to stakeholders across the world, understanding the bottom line implications of that, and wanting to do good for the better, and particularly around talent and making sure people are well engaged. And when they're doing the work that they love and are compensated well for it, there's terrific opportunity for everybody.
You know, it's really good to hear that. I'm afraid there are also some other studies. A study that recently came out that was partly authored by somebody from Vanderbilt, and so I'm really pleased to hear about that. But in this particular study, what it looked at is the perspectives of very wealthy individuals relative to the general population, and it found very significant discrepancies. This was in the US, and it raised all kinds of questions about a democratic system in which those individuals have undue influence and yet have a very different set of perspectives from the overall population. So hopefully the book redresses that a little bit, and it's really encouraging to hear that, Heather. You know, coming back to our responsibility, I would say a number of aspects: to learn, to inform others, to participate, to support causes, advocate, and persevere. I mean, to kind of hang in this. You know, again, thinking of the Canadian healthcare system, that didn't come in overnight. That took quite some time to put in place. But we're struggling with that mightily in the U.S. To try and move in that direction. So it's, you know, it is about perseverance in many cases. These issues can take years to take hold, and it's probably true also of corporate social responsibility embedding in organizations and the time that that will take to become really strategic, as opposed to organizations being, you know, higher up on that list of, or earlier in the adoption scale, if you like. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, from a time point of view, if you're comfortable continuing, it's fine with me. Or if we have any kind of time constraint, I can bring us to a conclusion. I'll leave that entirely up to you and up to your option.
Since we started at about 5 after the hour, can we take just 5 more minutes to, if there are any final questions or any other final points you'd like to make, Ron?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm going to check in first and see if there are any comments or observations that people might have.
There are no questions in the dashboard as of right now. So I believe everybody's got their questions answered. I'm just wondering if, Deborah, you'd like us to unmute your line so you guys are able to provide some feedback right now. So I'll unmute that, and you guys can go ahead with any last questions.
Lady, I thank you for the offer. I think we're all set, and our group ends shortly, so we'll probably have to sign off in a moment. But thank you so much.
Okay, well, let me just close then, if I could, with a sort of a summary of themes and issues. Let me suggest that it's important we recognize that business is in service to our society and not the other way around, that social responsibility is central to the purpose of business, that our economic system is sustainable only when it creates better lives for all of us, the need to balance public good and organizational gain, and the danger of pursuing profit where community service is the primary need. And healthcare in the US is an example of that. And the importance of relationship and collaboration, of interdependence. And here's a quote to sort of almost close with. This is, again, from Joan Chichester. That courage is coming to realize that what does and does not happen in the world does so because of what you and I fail to say, not when silence is right, but when we fear the cost to ourselves of speaking out. And it's embracing such courage, individually and collectively, that we can create a better world for all of us. And I hope we can then say, compassionate at last. We are compassionate at last. And so, with that, I just say a big thank you for being a part of this, and best wishes to everyone.
Well, thank you, Ron. On behalf of ACP International, our members and guests who've joined the webinar today, that was terrific. It was hopeful, helpful, both strategic as well as practical, and I think it afforded an opportunity for all of us to think more clearly about how we can have an impact individually within our societies, our global neighborhoods, if you will, and also within organizations as a means of making ourselves distinctive as value-added providers. Because we cross over so many aspects of the HR spectrum as career professionals, sometimes it's just not clear where we add value. But I do know that when we come to the table with this topic and ourselves demonstrate within our own practices that we are committed to corporate social responsibility in whatever way that makes sense for people, that it does say to potential organizations and clients that we are contemporary, we're committed, and we are definitely connected to others across the world through our network, where this has a direct and financial input on the bottom line. There's no question whatsoever about that. So thank you so much. Can you relay a little bit about how, if some of our members and guests are interested in your book, how they might acquire it?
Oh, yes, I suppose I should actually pick up a copy. Hold on. Yeah, so this is the book, which you probably can't see too well. It's available through many online sources, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the usual online sources. It'll be available through some retail outlets. I'm not quite sure which currently are carrying it. And it's also available from the publisher, Potomac. but probably the easiest way to obtain it, thanks for asking, is just through someone like Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com. It's available in Canada as well as the US and the UK.
Terrific. That's great. And we'll also, at the conclusion of the webinar, we'll put a note up on our website about access to the book if some of our members are interested.
Tremendous. Well, thanks so much for the invitation, Heather, and really appreciate being able to be a part of the group today.
Well, thank you for making yourself available and your expertise. And just in closing, again, thanks to our Salon host in New England today, Deborah Burkholder and the New England network of ACPI International, and others who've joined us globally as individuals. We definitely will be continuing this Salon series. And most likely the next one will be after our ACPI International session in Amsterdam, which is called Connection, Collaboration, and Contribution, Engaging One World Voice on Career Development. And that will be on Saturday, May the 18th in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Thank you to everyone as well who completed and participated in the global coaching study. Those preliminary results will be released at our global forum. And just want to draw attention to a couple of other announcements. In the Greater Toronto area, there will be an event on Tuesday, April the 16th in Toronto called Talent Turbulence, Best New Tactics, Trends, and Techniques for Career Professionals. It's our annual event around what we call a cracker barrel, so there'll be a tremendous array of interactive opportunities for people to meet new members and guests on a variety of issues. And that is on Tuesday, April the 16th, 2013 here in Toronto. And in early June, for those people who are in the Ontario area and also in New York State, there will be a big conference from Your Workplace magazine as hosts. The title of the subject matter of the conference will be all about engagements. And for those who have participated in this conference before in Toronto last year, a lot of our ACPI International members that participated, they found it to be tremendously rewarding. So this is June 5th and 6th in the Thousand Islands, Kingston area of Ontario. And there will be a discount available on the conference registration for our members. So some exciting things coming up for ACPI International. Again, thank you to Ron Ellison, our presenter today on corporate social responsibility and the impacts both organizationally as well as individually that can be made. And for those who contributed today, thank you so much. And we look forward to our next opportunity for our next Salon with ACPI International. Thank you very much.
Goodbye now.
Bye-bye.